The storm rages outside, but inside the quiet diner, a billionaire's world is about to unravel. Secrets, revenge, and a chance encounter with a waitress, one moment will change everything. What happens when the truth comes to light? You won't believe who holds the key to his fate. The rain hit the windows of the diner like a steady drumbeat, rhythmic and unrelenting. Outside, the city was a blur of gray streets, distant headlights, and people huddling under umbrellas, just trying to get to where they needed to go. Inside, the warmth of the diner stood in stark contrast, a safe haven from the storm. The bell above the door jingled as it opened, and the cool air swept in, mingling with the smell of coffee and fried eggs. Lily Green looked up from the counter where she was scrubbing a glass, wiping the droplets of water from her brow. She didn't expect anyone new. But then there he was, Tyler Montgomery, tall, sharply dressed in a black suit, his dark hair perfectly slicked back as if he'd just walked out of a boardroom meeting, not a storm. His face was the kind that could make a room fall silent, handsome, distant, cold. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and made everyone notice, whether he wanted to or not. Lily couldn't help but glance his way as he approached the counter. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice light, casual, as if serving a billionaire was no different from serving the regulars who sat at the same booth every day. His eyes lingered on her for a moment before he nodded, his gaze almost too intense, as if sizing her up. "Please," he said, his voice low, but with a certain sharpness to it. There was an edge to his tone that Lily could feel, even as she poured the coffee into the chipped mug in front of him. She slid it toward him, a bit too quickly, not quite making eye contact. It had been a long shift, and her mind was clouded with the weight of the world she was trying to escape. Constant bills, rent overdue, and that lingering sense that maybe, just maybe, this life wasn't where she was meant to be. But there he was, sitting across from her, and for some reason his presence was like a magnet pulling her in, despite the storm inside her own head. "You work here often?" he asked, leaning forward just slightly, the question hanging in the air with more curiosity than she expected. Lily hesitated, her hands pausing for just a second as she wiped down the counter. "Yeah, most days. Not much else to do around here." She was surprised by the question. It was strange for a man like him to be interested in her life, in the life of someone who served him coffee in a rundown diner. But there was something about his eyes, something beneath the surface, that told her he wasn't just making small talk. She felt it, a kind of vulnerability beneath that polished exterior. For a moment, the words hung between them, as if the rain outside had stopped, the noise of the diner fading away, and all that was left was this odd, unexpected connection. Tyler's eyes flicked to the window for just a second, then back at her. "Seems like there's a lot of quiet in this city," he said. "A lot of people trying to make noise and still being drowned out." Lily nodded, swallowing the rising emotion in her throat. It wasn't a feeling she could put into words. She felt the weight of it, the familiar sensation of drowning in a world that never seemed to hear her. "Yeah, I guess so," she said quietly. "But it's the quiet that keeps you alive. Otherwise, everything just burns out." There was a brief pause, and Tyler leaned back slightly in his chair, taking a slow sip from his mug, his gaze never leaving her face. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now, a hint of something beneath the surface. "Lily," she replied. It wasn't much of an introduction, but there was something in the way he asked that made her feel like she was more than just a waitress. She almost wanted to explain, to tell him about her life, the struggles, the weight of her past, but something stopped her. She wasn't sure if she could trust him. Tyler raised an eyebrow, his gaze flickering to the window again as the rain intensified. "You're not from here, are you?" Lily laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm about as local as they come, born and raised. But that doesn't mean I belong." His lips twitched into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Funny, I don't think I ever really felt like I belonged either." "You get used to it." Lily didn't know how to respond to that. She had always felt out of place. Too much of the world weighed down on her for her to ever truly feel like she belonged anywhere. And here he was, this billionaire who seemed to have everything, telling her he, too, didn't belong. For a moment, they just sat there, exchanging a silence that felt heavy with meaning. The din of the diner, the hum of the coffee machine in the background, the rain still tapping against the window. It was as if they had both stepped into a space between worlds, neither fully present, neither fully absent. Tyler's hand lingered on the mug, his fingers lightly tracing the rim. "Do you ever think about leaving?" he asked, his tone suddenly more serious. Lily felt the weight of the question settle on her. "Sometimes, but it's like trying to run from something that's always been a part of you." A flicker of understanding passed across his face, and for a second, she saw something, an ache perhaps, behind the polished mask of the billionaire. But then it was gone, just as quickly as it had appeared. "I get that," he said quietly, his voice a little lower now. "Sometimes the only thing we can do is stay." She didn't say anything to that. She couldn't, because she knew exactly what he meant, and it scared her more than she cared to admit. The conversation faded, but the tension between them didn't. It hung there, fragile and unresolved, like the rain pounding against the diner windows, echoing the unsaid words both of them were too afraid to speak. But as Tyler finished his coffee and stood to leave, he turned to her one last time, offering a brief but sincere smile. "Maybe I'll see you around, Lily," he said, his voice softer now, almost like an invitation. She nodded, but didn't answer. Instead, she watched him leave, the door chiming once more, his figure disappearing into the gray, rainy streets outside. And for the first time in a long while, Lily felt something she hadn't expected, an odd, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. The day dragged on, as most days did in the diner. The low hum of conversation, the clink of plates, and the occasional chime of the door as customers came and went. But Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like a ripple in the still water of her routine. The memory of Tyler Montgomery's dark, thoughtful eyes lingered long after he'd walked out. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about him, something real beneath all the wealth and power. She wiped down the counter again, the repetitive action almost soothing, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside her. The rain hadn't let up either, coming down harder now, almost angrily. Her shift felt endless, as if time had decided to move in slow motion. The bell above the door jingled once more, and Lily glanced up, expecting to see a regular, maybe one of the older gentlemen who liked to sit by the window and talk about politics, or the college kid who only ever ordered the cheapest coffee. But instead, it was Tyler again. This time, his posture was different. He was more hunched, shoulders tense, eyes shadowed with something Lily couldn't place. She felt a tug of concern, though she wasn't sure why. It wasn't like him to show vulnerability, not in a place like this, not in front of someone like her. He slid into the same seat by the window. His suit was more rumpled than it had been earlier, his tie loosened around his neck. His eyes were distant, looking through the rain and into something far beyond the diner. "Another coffee?" Lily asked, trying to sound neutral, but her voice faltered ever so slightly. Tyler didn't look up immediately. He ran a hand over his face, the weight of something heavy pressing down on him. "Yeah," he said, his voice hoarse, like he hadn't been talking much today. "Thanks." She filled the mug in silence, not pressing him, not sure whether he wanted to talk. The sound of the coffee pouring into the mug was oddly loud in the quiet space between them. She set it in front of him, this time not sliding it, just placing it gently on the counter, unsure if he even noticed. The rain outside was louder now, like it was trying to break through the glass. Tyler picked up the cup, his fingers trembling ever so slightly as he held it. He stared at the surface of the dark liquid, the steam rising in thin tendrils, but his thoughts seemed far away. Lily hesitated. She didn't want to intrude, but something about him today was different. The confident, controlled man she had briefly met earlier was gone, replaced by someone who seemed vulnerable. Human. He wasn't just the billionaire, the symbol of wealth and power. He was a man who had a life of his own, a life full of struggles she could only guess at. She found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "You okay?" The words were simple, casual, but they hung there between them, more loaded than Lily realized. She immediately regretted asking. He was a stranger. She barely knew him. But something about the way he sat there, his dark eyes heavy with worry, made her feel like maybe she did have a right to ask. Tyler's eyes flicked up to meet hers, a flash of something in them, something fleeting. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he took a long sip of his coffee, letting the silence stretch before him. Finally, he exhaled, the tension in his shoulders never fully releasing. "I don't know," he muttered. "Just, everything feels like it's falling apart." The words were barely above a whisper, but they hit her like a punch. For a moment, she was caught off guard. A billionaire admitting he couldn't control everything? A man who had the world in his hands? It felt almost wrong, but there was an honesty in his voice she hadn't expected. "I thought people like you had everything figured out," Lily said before she could stop herself. Her tone was teasing, but her eyes were serious. She wanted to know what had caused this shift in him. Tyler chuckled, but it was bitter. "You'd be surprised," he said quietly. "It's funny how the more you have, the less you actually control. You start to feel powerless." Lily blinked. She hadn't expected that. He just dropped his guard in a way that no one did in her world, and for a second, it made her uncomfortable. "Powerless," she echoed, trying to wrap her mind around it. He nodded, but there was a heaviness to it, like it was more than just a word. Money can buy a lot of things. Control? Not so much. Not when everything you've worked for is falling apart. He stared out the window, his face tense, but there was something else there now. Something Lily could almost touch. Regret. Guilt. "You don't look like you're falling apart," she said, the words coming out without thinking. The image of him, this powerful man, was too stark against the vulnerability she saw now. Tyler's lips twitched into something like a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah. Well, I've had practice at pretending." It hit her then. He wasn't just a billionaire worried about business. He was a man struggling to keep up a facade. He had no one to talk to, no one who truly understood him. Maybe that was why he kept coming back here, to this small, ordinary place. Maybe it was the only thing that still felt real to him. Lily didn't know how to respond to that. She just nodded, sensing that there was more to this man than his wealth. There was a loneliness, a fear of losing it all, something that made him seem less like the rich, untouchable figure everyone thought he was, and more like someone who, in some ways, was just like her. The silence stretched between them again, but this time, it felt less uncomfortable. She found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she'd thought. When Tyler stood to leave, he didn't say anything else, just gave her a brief, almost apologetic glance. "I'll see you around, Lily," he said quietly, and this time, his voice held a different note, almost like a promise. Lily watched him go, the door chiming behind him, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure what to expect next. The rain showed no sign of slowing down. If anything, it had only gotten heavier, drumming against the windows with a fierce intensity. Lily had already cleaned every table twice, wiped down the counter, and gone through the motions of 1,000 similar shifts. But today was different. Today, her mind was 100 miles away, caught somewhere between the man who had walked in and the strange, lingering feeling that he might be important in a way she couldn't quite grasp. She was at the far end of the diner, stacking plates when the bell above the door chimed again. This time, it wasn't Tyler. It was just another regular, Mr. Watkins, the elderly man who always came in for his coffee and a slice of apple pie at exactly 3:15 p.m. He smiled warmly at Lily, his weathered face crinkling. "Same as usual, Miss Green?" he asked, his voice gentle but familiar. She smiled back, nodding. "Of course, Mr. Watkins. Just give me a sec." As she turned to get his coffee, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She reached for it quickly, glancing at the screen. A name she hadn't seen in years flashed across the display, Dad. Her stomach turned. It was the kind of call Lily had been avoiding since she left her small-town life behind. She hadn't spoken to her father in years, not after he disappeared and left her to pick up the pieces. The guilt that had come with him abandoning her still hung over her, and even the thought of hearing from him made her stomach churn with a mix of anger and dread. She let it go to voicemail, shoving the phone back in her pocket as she set the coffee down in front of Mr. Watkins. The last thing she needed was to deal with the man who had never been there for her. "Everything all right, Miss Green?" Mr. Watkins asked, his eyes soft and understanding. Lily flashed him a tight smile, not wanting to open that door. "Just fine, Mr. Watkins. Thanks for asking." She moved away, walking toward the back to get more pie from the fridge, but her mind kept drifting back to the missed call. What did he want now? She wondered, feeling the knot of frustration tighten in her chest. Back at the counter, she found herself staring out the window, watching the rain streak down in thick, fast-moving sheets. The thought of Tyler Montgomery, so out of place in this little diner, yet somehow lingering in her mind, returned again. Her interaction with him felt almost surreal, but she couldn't deny the subtle change in the air when he was around. He hadn't just been a customer. He had been something else entirely. As she wiped down the counter again, she noticed him. Tyler was walking past the diner window, heading toward a black town car parked on the curb. He didn't look back, but Lily caught the tightness in his jaw and the hurried steps. There was something about his body language, something raw and unguarded, that caught her attention. Without thinking, she stepped to the door and watched him climb into the car. She wasn't sure what had come over her, but a strange instinct pushed her to look. As the car pulled away, her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. Dad. Something clicked. The image of Tyler walking away in that sudden, tense hurry, his sharp suit now rumpled, like he had been somewhere private, somewhere personal, made Lily feel like there was more to the man than just a business empire. Her instincts told her that whatever he was running from, it had to be bigger than just a bad deal or a failed investment. It was like he was carrying something dark and heavy that no one could see. She turned back inside, her heart hammering in her chest. Was it possible that Tyler Montgomery was in the same kind of prison she'd spent years trying to escape? Was he as trapped by his own choices as she was by hers? Lily leaned against the counter, her mind spinning. But then, just as she was about to push those thoughts away, she heard a voice. "Lily." She turned sharply, startled. It was Tyler standing in the doorway, a shadow against the bright, rainy backdrop outside. He wasn't dressed the same as before. His tie was askew and his coat was unbuttoned, but it was the look in his eyes that threw her. They were wide, wild even, like he'd been through something. "Tyler?" Lily asked, surprised, her voice wavering slightly. He hesitated, then stepped inside. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice strained. Lily's heart raced. She didn't know what to expect. She'd barely known him for an hour, and yet here he was, looking like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. She stepped back, gesturing for him to sit. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice softer now, more cautious. She hadn't expected this. She had barely expected him to return, much less to be standing here in front of her like this. Tyler didn't immediately sit. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, frustration and anxiety radiating off him. "It's all falling apart," he muttered, mostly to himself. He paced for a moment before stopping and looking directly at her. "You were right," he said, his voice raw. "I don't have control. I never did." Lily felt the familiar weight of sympathy creep in, mixed with a twinge of confusion. She'd seen him as this untouchable, powerful figure, a man who had it all. But now, hearing him speak so vulnerably, he was a different person. A real person. "What do you mean? What's happening?" Lily asked, her voice steady, trying to hide the concern that had suddenly welled up inside her. Tyler's expression darkened. He looked away for a moment, as if the weight of his own confession was too much to bear. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There's more to it than I let on. A lot more. And I think you might be the only one who can help me." Lily swallowed. Her heart was pounding in her chest. What was he talking about? Was it about his business? Or was it something deeper? Something that had nothing to do with money? The storm raged outside, the world blurred by rain. But inside the diner, there was something entirely different at play. Something that would change everything. The rain hadn't let up since Tyler entered the diner, but in the warmth of the small, quiet space, the world outside felt like a distant memory. The soft hum of the coffee machine, the clinking of plates, and the low murmur of Mr. Watkins' conversations filled the air, but none of it reached Tyler. His eyes were distant, lost in the turmoil of something deeper, darker than any storm outside. Lily's pulse quickened as she watched him. His words hung in the air like an unanswered question. "You're the only one who can help me." The weight of that statement was still sinking in, and she wasn't sure whether to feel flattered, confused, or terrified. She had no business getting involved in his mess, no business at all. She was just a waitress, but something in his eyes, the way he looked at her, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could make a difference. She gestured toward the counter. "Sit down," she said, her voice steady even though her heart was racing. "Tell me what's going on." Tyler hesitated for a second, then walked over to the counter, collapsing into the seat with a deep sigh. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his face gaunt, his shoulders tense. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man on the edge, someone who had been holding everything together for too long and was now starting to unravel. Lily wiped her hands on her apron, leaning against the counter as she waited for him to speak. The silence stretched for a few moments before Tyler exhaled deeply, as though gathering the courage to speak his truth. "It's my company," he started, his voice thick with frustration. "I've been making mistakes. Big ones. Financial decisions they're ruining everything I've built. Everything I've worked for." He ran his hand through his hair again, clearly agitated. "I'm on the verge of losing it all. My investors, the board, they're turning against me. I don't know who to trust anymore." Lily's brow furrowed. She hadn't expected this. She had imagined a different kind of problem, a bad press release, a failed business deal, but not this level of collapse. She hadn't expected him to be so human. "Tyler, I don't know how I can help you," she said carefully, her voice softening as she spoke. "I'm just a waitress. What could I possibly do?" He met her gaze, his eyes earnest and desperate. "I don't want to drag you into this. I really don't. But there's something you need to know. Something that involves your father." Lily's stomach dropped at the mention of her father's name. She had been trying to avoid thinking about him, had buried the anger and the resentment she felt for him under layers of silence. She hadn't even picked up his phone call earlier. But now, hearing Tyler say it out loud, "Your father," it hit her like a cold wave. She couldn't escape him. Not now. Not when everything seemed to be unraveling. "My father," she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "What does my father have to do with this?" Tyler leaned forward, his voice lower now, almost as if speaking to himself more than to her. "Your father worked for me. Years ago. He made a mistake. A huge one. A bad investment that I trusted him with, and it's part of what's bringing my company down." He paused, taking a deep breath. "And I think it's why everything's falling apart now. Your father's failure, it's come back to haunt me. And I didn't know how to tell you this, but you're the only one who knows him. You're the only one who might understand." Lily stared at him, the words slowly sinking in. Her father? The man who had abandoned her, who had left her with nothing. The man who had run from his own mistakes? Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of anger and disbelief swirling inside her. Could it be true? Could her father have been the cause of this man's downfall? Was this the reason Tyler was sitting here, vulnerable and desperate? She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't let herself get lost in the rush of emotions. Not now. She had to think, had to process this without letting the past cloud her judgment. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" Lily asked, her voice more guarded now. She couldn't help herself. It felt like a betrayal, even if she didn't fully understand why. "Why come to me now?" Tyler looked down, his fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "Because I need your help. Your father's mistake. It's not just about the money. It's about something deeper. Something that could destroy everything I've worked for. And I need you to help me fix it." Lily felt the walls in her mind start to shift, but she was still hesitant. Could she really help him? Was there even anything she could do? Or was she just a pawn in a game she didn't understand? She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her softened. Tyler wasn't just the cold, distant billionaire. He was someone who had been brought to his knees, by the very things that had once made him untouchable. His vulnerability, his honesty. It was something she didn't see every day. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but maybe he wasn't the villain she'd imagined. Lily exhaled slowly, her decision hanging in the air. "I don't know how much help I can be," she said carefully, "but I'll try. I'll listen." Tyler nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time, he seemed like he had a sliver of hope. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. For Lily, it felt like the beginning of something new. Something she couldn't fully grasp yet, but something that had the potential to change everything. In the depths of his despair, Tyler had reached out to her, and she was starting to see that maybe, just maybe, their stories were intertwined in ways neither of them could yet understand. The rain outside continued to fall, but inside the diner, something else was brewing. A quiet, unspoken connection that might just be the thing that saves them both. The storm outside had begun to subside, the rain tapering off into a light drizzle. The streets were glistening, slick with the remnants of the downpour. But inside the diner, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Lily stood behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge as she stared at Tyler, who had just finished explaining everything. His empire on the verge of collapse, the role her father played in it, and his desperate need for help. And yet, as he spoke, Lily couldn't shake the sense that there was more to the story, more that Tyler wasn't telling her. His words, though filled with desperation and vulnerability, still felt like a carefully constructed plea, a way to pull her in without revealing the true cost of his request. Tyler shifted in his seat, rubbing his temples as if he had been carrying this burden for far too long. "I'm not asking you to fix everything," he said, his voice quiet. "I just need some information. Your father, he was working on a deal with me before he disappeared. If we can find out exactly what went wrong, maybe we can salvage something. Maybe I can turn it around." Lily folded her arms across her chest, the weight of his request sinking in. Find out what went wrong. How could she? Her father had left years ago without a word, vanishing into the chaos of his own mistakes, leaving Lily to pick up the pieces of a life broken by abandonment. She felt a pang of frustration, a familiar bitterness that she had spent years burying. "You want me to just go digging into my father's past? The same man who left me behind? The same man who ruined everything? What makes you think I'd want to help you fix this?" Tyler flinched, a flicker of regret passing through his eyes. "I'm not trying to disrespect you, Lily. I get it, but I need to know what he was working on. If we can trace it back, figure out where things went wrong, maybe we can stop the whole thing from imploding." Lily exhaled sharply, her heart pounding in her chest. It was one thing to ask for help, but it was another to ask her to relive the years of pain that she had tried so hard to escape. Her father's mistakes, those words hung in the air, pulling her down into the mess of her own history. Her father's absence had defined so much of her life, and now Tyler was asking her to dig into that wreckage. But there was something else, something that kept her from walking away. The more Tyler spoke, the more she saw the cracks in his carefully constructed exterior. The billionaire who had everything was, in reality, a man on the brink of losing it all. And for reasons she couldn't fully understand, Lily felt a flicker of empathy for him. She knew what it was like to carry the weight of your past on your shoulders, to feel like everything was slipping away. "You don't get it," she said softly, her voice trembling. "It's not just about him, it's about me. Everything he left behind, everything he broke, he left me to clean up the mess. And you want me to help you find the one thing that could destroy what little is left of my family." Tyler's gaze softened. "I never meant to drag you into this. I swear I didn't. But I'm running out of options, and I know you're the one person who might understand what it feels like to lose everything." Lily met his eyes, her heart beating faster now. His honesty, his willingness to show her the cracks in his armor was something she hadn't expected. She had always thought of men like him as untouchable, insulated from the struggles that made up her world. But here he was, broken and raw, reaching out to her in a way that made her want to believe in the possibility of something different. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. I'll try. I'll try to find out what he was working on. But this isn't just about you. This is about me too. About figuring out why everything fell apart in the first place. Tyler's face softened with relief. Thank you. I know this isn't easy. I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. Lily nodded, but her mind was already spinning, racing with the weight of the decision she had just made. She wasn't just stepping into the unknown by helping him. She was stepping into a mess of her own making. A web of betrayal, abandonment, and regret. Her father's sins weren't just his own. They had shaped her, defined her in ways she hadn't wanted to face. And yet, there was something about Tyler's vulnerability that made her want to believe that they both could somehow find a way out of the mess they were in. Something in the way he looked at her, as though he trusted her, needed her, even made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could change the course of both their lives. Okay, she said, swallowing the knot in her throat. I'll help you. But don't think this is going to be easy. Tyler stood up, his expression a mixture of relief and gratitude. I don't expect it to be, but I appreciate you giving me a chance. Lily turned away, walking toward the back of the diner. She needed a moment alone, a chance to gather her thoughts. The decision she had just made was going to change everything. But she didn't know yet whether it would be for better or for worse. She glanced back at Tyler before disappearing into the kitchen. He was already sitting at the counter, his head in his hands, the weight of his situation pressing down on him. She had no idea what was coming next. But for the first time in a long while, Lily felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as powerless as she had always believed. The days blurred together, one after the other, as Lily dove headfirst into the task she had never expected to take on. The search for her father's past, his mistakes, his failures, the deals he had been involved in, had become an obsession. It was as if by uncovering those secrets, she could finally understand why everything had fallen apart, why her life had never been whole, and somehow, why Tyler Montgomery was so desperately tied to it all. Every evening after her shifts, she would comb through old records, letters, and the few scraps of information her father had left behind. His disappearance was a wound she had never allowed herself to pick at, but now she was forced to confront it. Each new document, each whispered rumor from people who had once known him, made her feel like she was getting closer to something dark, something crucial. Tyler called occasionally, checking in, asking if she'd found anything useful, but each time, her answers grew more distant. She was sinking into this puzzle, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on her more and more. And yet, she couldn't stop. There was something about Tyler's vulnerability, his need for help, that anchored her. But the deeper she dug, the more her father's shadow seemed to creep back into her life. She was uncovering more than she'd bargained for. One night, just as she was about to call it a day, the phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but she answered anyway. Lily, the voice on the other end said, rough and hesitant. Yeah, she replied, a chill running through her veins. There was something in his tone, something urgent, something hidden. It's me. Tyler, he said. You need to meet me. I found something. It's about your father. Her heart skipped a beat. About her father? It felt like the past had just reached out and grabbed her, yanking her into the storm she had been trying to avoid. I'm listening, she said, her voice tight with anticipation. You need to come to my office. Now. It's important. We can't talk over the phone. There was no room for argument. She grabbed her coat, already heading out the door before he could say anything more. The thought of what might be waiting for her was enough to propel her forward, despite the fear that clawed at her insides. When she arrived at Tyler's office building, it was quiet, the lobby lit only by the soft glow of the fluorescent lights above. It felt sterile, too cold for the conversation they were about to have. Tyler was waiting for her at the elevator, his expression tense, his shoulders stiff as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him once again. I'm glad you came, he said quietly, as the elevator door slid open, revealing a long, empty corridor. They walked in silence, the faint clicking of their footsteps echoing down the hall. When they reached his office, Tyler opened the door for her and she stepped inside, her heart hammering. It was a large space, minimalist but tastefully decorated. Nothing in it suggested the kind of man Tyler had become. The walls were lined with sleek wood panels, the floors covered with a plush rug. But none of it mattered in that moment. The only thing that mattered was what Tyler had found. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. "I need to show you something." Lily perched on the edge of the seat, her fingers trembling as she clasped them in her lap. Tyler was pacing now, his frustration clear in every movement. Finally, he stopped, grabbing a manila folder from the edge of his desk. He tossed it onto the table in front of her. "This," he said, his voice low, "is what your father was working on. And I need you to understand, this is bigger than just a failed investment. This is about betrayal. About things that no one should ever do to someone they care about." Lily stared at the folder, the familiar weight of her father's mistakes pressing down on her. Could she really open this door? The questions churned in her mind, but there was no turning back now. She opened the folder slowly, hesitating just for a moment before pulling out the first piece of paper. The document in her hands was a contract, one with her father's signature at the bottom. Tyler was right. This was no ordinary investment gone wrong. This was a deal that had involved her father selling secrets. Secrets that had put Tyler's company in danger. Lily's eyes scanned the document, the words becoming a blur as they hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her father had sold out Tyler Montgomery. The realization crashed over her, drowning her in shock and disbelief. The man who had abandoned her had caused the very thing Tyler had been fighting to protect. The thing that had brought him to his knees. I don't understand," Lily whispered, the papers shaking in her hands. "Why would he do this? Why would he sell you out?" Tyler stood still, his eyes dark with a mixture of pain and rage. Because he was desperate. Because he wanted to save himself, even if it meant destroying everyone else. Her mind reeled as the pieces began to fall into place. Her father's betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was intentional. And now, Tyler was the one left picking up the pieces, caught in a web of his own making. The web that her father had built. Lily couldn't breathe. She wasn't just a bystander to this mess. She was part of it. Her father's sins had become her own burden to bear, and she was left with the choice of how to move forward. But everything felt heavier now. "I never wanted you involved in this," Tyler said, his voice low, almost pleading. "But it seems like the past never lets go, does it?" Lily looked up at him, her heart still racing. She had never imagined this. She had never thought that her father's actions could have such far-reaching consequences. She had been trying so hard to forget, but now she was trapped, pulled into a cycle of betrayal and regret that she could no longer avoid. "I don't know what to do with this," she whispered, her voice cracking. Tyler reached across the desk, his hand resting gently on hers. "I don't know either. But maybe together, we can stop it from getting worse." Lily's mind was a whirlwind, but for the first time since she had started this journey, she saw a way forward. Not a perfect way, not an easy one, but a way. A way that might finally let her close the door on the past. The rain had returned, falling gently but persistently as Lily stood on the sidewalk outside Tyler's office building. It felt like the sky was reflecting the turmoil inside her. Clouded, heavy and full of unresolved tension. The papers in her hand, the damning evidence of her father's betrayal, were a weight she could no longer ignore. It felt as though everything she had known about her life had shifted in one fell swoop. Her father's mistakes, his choices, the way they had ruined lives, and Tyler's life, it was all too much to process. Tyler had walked her to the door after their conversation, but he hadn't said much. He hadn't needed to. She could feel the heaviness of his thoughts pressing against her as they stood there in silence. He was just as lost as she was, but now they were both standing on the precipice of something they couldn't turn back from. She turned her head up toward the rain, letting it wash over her face, cool and cleansing. The coldness on her skin mirrored the way she felt inside. A part of her still frozen in the past, unable to move forward. Her father's actions had put everything she had fought for in jeopardy. But Tyler, he had trusted her. He had believed in her when she hadn't even believed in herself. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her thoughts, and she turned to see Tyler walking toward her, his coat collar turned up against the rain. His dark eyes were fixed on her, his face serious but softer than before. There was a vulnerability there that hadn't been present earlier. "You don't have to carry this alone," Tyler said, his voice low but steady. "Whatever happens next, we face it together. You're not the only one who's lost everything." Lily swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had spent so long trying to run from her past, from her father's mistakes. But now, she realized that it wasn't just about letting go of him. It was about letting go of the anger that had been consuming her, about choosing to move forward, even when everything seemed broken. She looked at Tyler, really looked at him for the first time since everything had unraveled. The powerful, distant billionaire who had once seemed so untouchable, now standing before her with the same rawness and uncertainty she had felt her entire life. She could see it in him now, his struggles, his losses, his own desire for redemption. "I don't know if I can forgive him," she said softly, her voice catching in her throat. "But I know I can't keep carrying this weight. It's been too much for too long." Tyler nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Forgiveness takes time, but you don't have to do it alone. We'll figure it out together." The rain was still falling, but Lily felt the first glimmer of warmth in her chest. For the first time in ages, she didn't feel so alone. The past wasn't gone, it was still there, lingering in the background. But now, it wasn't the thing defining her. It wasn't the thing that was going to decide her future. Tyler stepped closer, just a few inches between them, the quiet sound of rain the only thing left. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart still ached. Tyler smiled, though it wasn't the confident, knowing smile she had seen before. It was a softer smile, one that spoke of understanding, of shared struggle. "We start over," he said quietly. "We start fresh. We don't let the past own us anymore." Lily took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. Maybe it wouldn't be easy. Maybe the road ahead would be full of more challenges, more hurt, more healing. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a chance, an opportunity to rebuild, to take the pieces of her broken past and forge something new, something better. "Together," she whispered. "Together," Tyler agreed, his voice barely above a whisper, but there was strength in it. They stood there for a moment longer, letting the rain wash away the tension, the bitterness, and the uncertainty. And for the first time in a long time, Lily felt like she could move forward. She wasn't defined by her father's mistakes or Tyler's collapse. She wasn't defined by the mistakes she had made or the pain that had been dealt to her. She was her own person, and with Tyler at her side, she could face whatever was ahead, no matter how uncertain. The rain finally began to let up, the clouds parting just enough for a sliver of moonlight to shine through. It was a quiet moment, but in that silence, there was an understanding, a promise that no matter what the future held, they would walk through it together.